All right, and we are live back on the Dev Twitch stream. My name is Nick Taylor. I'm a lead software engineer at Forum. Forum is the software that powers dev.
And I'm Christina Gorton. I am a developer advocate at Forum. Today we have a wonderful guest, but before I introduce her, we do want to mention that we have the Dev Community Bug Smash happening again. We had this a few months ago, and it was a great time where everyone was, grabbing issues and contributing if they wanted to. We do want to have a note. We had some feedback, and we really thought it was important feedback and good. So a few folks mentioned that, this could be something that was taking up a lot of people's time, expecting too much, and that's definitely not what we want at all. This is just fun for the community. If you want to contribute, definitely chime in on any of the issues that are labeled Bug Smash in our repository. And if you have the time, go for it, communicate with us, and we're here to help you along the way. So other than that, we have a great guest today who's going to be talking about GraphQL, and her name is Lucia Cerchie. So go ahead and introduce yourself.
Guys, I'm Lucia Cerchie. I am a software engineer at StepZen, where we create one GraphQL API for all your different backends. And I've been developing professionally for a little bit now. Before that, I was a teacher for 4 years, and I taught really small children. Yeah, a lot of very simple concepts like yellow, and it was a really fun part of my life. And now I get to take complex concepts and break them down into things like blog posts. That's also a really fun part of my life. I'm also a mom. I have been developing for about as long as my daughter is alive. So that's kind of a fun thing. Every birthday she has is like, I've been coding for that long. Yeah, and we're here to talk about GraphQL and StepZen today. So we're going to start with I think the first question is, what is GraphQL? And one thing I want to mention is that I'm going to assume kind of a kind of basic familiarity with REST APIs. But if anybody has a question, please bring it up. I'm sure we'd love to talk about it, about REST. So I'll share my screen here and we'll get started.
Cool. Sounds good. I'm just responding in the chat with some Bob Ross here.
Nice.
All right. Okay. Cool. All right. So your screen's up there. So yeah.
Right.
Okay,
We should be on graphql.org right now.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So what is GraphQL? The QL stands for query language, and it's query language for APIs. And it's, in a way, some people think about it kind of like SQL, but I want to differentiate it from SQL because SQL queries databases, whereas GraphQL is only for APIs, right? We can layer a GraphQL API over a database, but at the same time, they query different things.
Okay.
GraphQL is, besides being a query language, did you have a question, Nick? Or
Oh no, I was just saying, okay. I was
Cool.
doing my mini small talk like, hey, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I do have one suggestion just before we keep going. Anytime you're on any of your screens, especially when we get to code, but even here, can you like try to bump it up a little bit to bump up the view? Yep, there we go.
Cool.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention, sometimes this gets bypassed, but it's important because StepZen works its magic by working with GraphQL as a runtime. It is a runtime. So it will parse your queries for you and then serialize them or put them in the right order as they come back. So that's just something I wanted to mention on the side. So I like using graphql.org for, this is a trick I picked up from my coworker Anthony, is starting here with their little graph here, because it kind of succinctly describes what GraphQL does for you. So you describe your data, and this is SDL here, which is called it's schema definition language. And we'll get more into that later. And then you ask for what you want. That's all you need, project with the name GraphQL and the tagline. And then you get your result in, this is JSON right here. It's, I think, important to understand just like how the benefits of that, right? Because with REST, you have all these issues with over and under fetching, like because you're stuck with REST endpoints. So say you had an endpoint with like customer and ID, and all you wanted was the customer name, but you get all this JSON back with the customer, their join date and then their their balance and all these things that you have to kind of filter out. And then you can also underfetch, like say you have one endpoint with customer ID and it has a bunch of information on the customer, but you have to fetch data from another endpoint and join it to get the customer's location. But with GraphQL, it kind of unifies those things so that you don't worry about that. It's almost like sometimes with GraphQL, I use a restaurant analogy where it's like if you went into a REST API as a restaurant, say, and you were like, hey, I want a shake and a burger, and the API returns to you a shake and a burger and some anchovies and avocados. And so you say, okay, I have to go and filter out all the anchovies and avocados. But with the GraphQL API layer, you can just say, this is what I want, a shake and a burger, and it comes right back to you.
Okay, that's a good analogy. That's definitely my experience with both of them. So that's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Also, side note, I do want a burger now.
I know, me too. The bunny grams that I stole from my daughter are not cutting it for breakfast this morning. But yeah, so and another interesting difference that I'd like to mention is that GraphQL it's basically it's protocol agnostic, so you don't have to use HTTP. But if you were going to contrast it with REST use post, put, patch, get, and delete, right? But GraphQL, the servers should only implement post and get. And most of the time they're using post. And then they implement the deletions and the updates through mutations, which we could talk about a little bit later. Any questions so far?
Yeah, well,
no,
I guess
people just chatting that you're mentioning food during their lunch hour.
Yeah.
They're a little upset with it.
Okay.
Everybody's like they made poor food choices for lunch, and we're talking about burgers now. Well, one thing we kind of talked about this briefly when we did the stream rehearsal, but like the experience that Christine and myself have had is pretty much with GraphQL has been pretty much just like tweaking some queries in Gatsby. I've used the editor kind of because it comes with Gatsby, so you can kind of tweak things, but that's kind of the extent of my own experience with it. But I think one thing you mentioned that's probably different from the REST API is like you can aggregate, like you can definitely grab the pieces like you said in the restaurant analogy, but you can also say like, well, that's a restaurant, but I'm also gonna, grab some stuff from a library or whatever. Like you can, like, it doesn't matter where the data is coming from, right? Because it's really an API. It's not. I mean, it's typically in a database, but it doesn't have to be, right?
Yeah, like I'll order up a burger with, I don't know, the latest Harry Potter book or something, and I'll come to your table. Yeah, no, that's 100% true. Yeah, that's actually one thing that StepZen helps you do easily is, I mean, this is getting ahead of myself a little bit, but we use custom directives to make it pretty quick to connect to SQL, NoSQL, say a library or your REST API, like your restaurant, or integrating other GraphQL APIs into your one endpoint. So that's definitely what you're talking about is 100% true.
Cool.
Yeah. So the next thing I want to talk about is this, which is probably what you were talking about before, right? With the editor tweaking queries and stuff.
Yeah, the Gatsby ships with this. I can't remember what it's called. Is it GraphQL?
I don't honestly. I say Graphical, but that's probably
okay. I don't know. I'm Canadian, so
right.
Who knows?
We all use it. Yeah, it's the Canadian pronunciation is Graphical.
GraphQL.
Yeah. Basically, it's an IDE that runs on your local host when your development server is running. So any GraphQL integrations that use a development server will be able to have this. And then we've got some like fun steps and add-ons I can show you later. But let's get started and review.
Oh, I think.
You pause for you, Nick. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's just wait a
Yeah.
second. We think we just have a little lull in our network here,
Yeah.
so we'll give her a second. Just making
Yeah.
sure it wasn't me.
Yeah. No, this does happen.
How do you?
Oh.
Wait, you froze up for a sec. This happened to me with. Are you back now? Yeah.
Yep.
We
she's back.
lost you for about 10 seconds. Just small funny side
Yes.
story. When Jerome Hardaway was on the stream, everything was going well, and then his kids were playing. I forget what video game they were playing, but like it took up all his bandwidth. So he's like talking, and he's like really getting into it, and then there was like a 2-minute period where it's like he comes back, he's like, "Yeah, my kids are playing whatever the game is. I don't know. I still play Super Mario myself." So, but anyways,
Me too.
You're back.
Cool. I'm glad.
So just to help you out where you went off, where you before you even clicked the like my query, we just lost you. So you might want to go over that real quick.
Gotcha. Okay, so this is a little, yeah. So the graphical, it's an IDE that runs. Did I mention that before I froze? Okay.
Yeah.
So this uses an IP API to grab a location by an IP address. So let's just get a couple things there to see that it works. And then I'm going to grab a sample IP address just from Google because I don't want to interrupt anybody's privacy here.
Okay. We'll call
Put it
that
in.
IP address.
This is I don't know where it comes from, but I assume that if it's available as the first result in Google, that it's okay to use.
Yeah,
and
we're hacking somebody.
Right. And so this is our parameter. It's of a string type, and we'll see how to create this later. And then we'll hit play in the IDE.
Okay.
All right. So debugging time. I'm going to check that I have my endpoint running.
Okay. And I'll just, while you're doing that, the question I have is, so we're on your local, and this is just a demo app, right? Like to get somebody's location. That's what we're looking at.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Here, I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment because I was having. Let's see. Stop streaming. I think. There I go.
Cool.
So I'm just gonna go in because I was having fun with it, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna show them how to debug later, and I'm gonna mess with one of the endpoints and put a bug in it. And I think I probably left it in there. So just
okay.
make sure that we're all good here.
It's this is the beauty of live streaming.
Right? Yeah, you get to show people how you.
Yeah,
how you
it's all
fix
good
stuff.
though. Whenever I'm live streaming, it's like you get stuck on something or you create a bug, and then it's like, oh yeah, okay, just hold on a sec here and stuff. But yeah, just to recap, while Lucia's just rebooting that, so she has a local application running that it's like a geolocation service. She just went to Google and just grabbed like a random IP from some search results. So we're hacking like Bobby tables at home or something. I don't know what we're about to do, but once the endpoint's back up, we're working in I've called it GraphQL, but I think everybody's right. It's probably called Graphical. That makes a lot more sense. Yeah, so from there, we're just doing a query, and then we're going to get some results through there. So that's kind of where we're at. And
yeah,
we were also, we were just talking about the benefits of GraphQL. We were using a restaurant analogy a few minutes ago, just talking about how like instead of like, get me this and then change that or whatever, you can just, it allows you to aggregate everything together. And so that you're kind of like, you just order once kind of thing and don't have to return stuff. Yeah, and that's kind of where we're at.
yeah. I am trying one more thing because it looks like that my endpoint is correct. So it might be,
Okay.
I did something fancy with my environment variables.
Okay.
So I'm just going to make sure that that is set up.
Cool.
I've been
If you want it.
using that cloak extension by John Papa.
Oh,
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
yeah, the VSCode one. Yeah, I'll drop a link to that unless you have that, Christina.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Nope,
Yeah.
I don't. But if you want to find it real quick.
Yeah, cool. And if you want, if the endpoint's not working, we can have some fun and actually debug it and try and figure out what's wrong.
Oh,
If
100%. Yeah.
Yep.
Just trying one last thing.
yeah, I just dropped in the chat there, so that's VS Code's cloak extension. And yeah, so what this extension does is it allows you to, if you have like a .env file in your project, it's happened many times. I've done it, and then once I did it, I installed this extension. But your environment variables get exposed during your stream or wherever you're demoing something. And given that VS Code is the technologies are all web based, I think my guess is the VS Code extension, cloak extension. What it does is it applies some CSS to when it knows it's in a .env file, and it still has all the values there. It's just that it hides them visually, which is perfect
Yeah.
for when you're streaming. Cool.
All right. I will be ready to start debugging with you guys in one moment. I'm just going to.
Cool. We can load that up, and then yeah, I guess it's running the local host you're running. It's a node server, or
So it's whatever comes with the graphical. So
okay, yeah. I'm guessing it's node stuff because all of it's pretty much okay. Yeah, Brian in the chat saying yes, it is. Yeah,
yes, awesome. Thank you, Brian.
cool. Yeah,
Just one more thing I'm doing in here.
yeah. While Lucia is just looking at that, Christina mentioned at the start of the stream that we have the bug smash going on for dev this month. Is it all month or how? What's the duration of it, Christina?
So technically it's like we started it for the month, but just like last time, if you are working on an issue this month and you don't get done by the end of the month,
Yeah.
just keep working on it. Put in your your article at the end of like what you did and stuff, and you'll still get the awesome little badge we get on dev and then a sticker pack. So you don't have to stress like if you're like working on it and you're like, I have to get it done by the end of the month, kind of like, sometimes with Hacktoberfest, I gotta get done
Yeah.
in October. You don't have to do that. You don't have to stress about it. Just start working on one if you want to, and if you don't have it done, don't worry. A lot of times PRs take longer. As
Yeah.
you're working through them, it's kind of it's one of those things you don't want to rush people on if you want a good PR, and which we want. So we want to help you.
Yeah,
We're here to help you, and so if you're chatting back and forth on your PRs, no worries. But yes, it's for this month.
Cool. Yeah, and like Christina was saying at the start too, there's no pressure to do this. It's really for fun. If it's something you want to do and you have time, we'd love you to participate. But don't stress out about it. If you don't have time to do something like this, it's totally okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh yeah,
I'm gonna get ready, and I can speak to that. Dev is amazing at helping with PRs.
Oh
So
yeah, and
Sharon,
Christina just dropped the query in the chat there, so you can check out the bug smash bugs there. Cool. All right, so let's
all
take a
right,
peek
so
here.
let's take a look. So we've
Okay.
got our IP address here. We've got our location, get location by IP address.
Okay.
And then the error that's coming back is connector HTTP error bad request. So what that makes me think usually, I don't know about you, Nick, but it makes me think, oh, like there must be something wrong with the endpoint. So we should go into my schema and look at get location by IP address and see what's going on with the endpoint, I think, first.
Okay.
Yeah, or yeah, you might not be passing all the stuff required as well.
Right.
Okay.
So that's also I was double checking my environment variables there.
Okay.
So
All right.
we are going to go to get location by IP address. Can you guys see my screen? Well, let me.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're gonna be learning GraphQL
Okay.
baptism by fire. Here we go.
Right, here we go, diving right in. So this is a query, and we've got the title. We're in an SDL file. So this defines GraphQL queries and types in the same file.
Okay.
This is the definition of that query we're using, and this is typing the IP address that we were putting in. So you can see that it's string, and it has to be a string. You need that little exclamation point. It says that we need that parameter in order to make it work. And then we're passing in a type of geolocation. So one thing I want to do, actually, no, that shouldn't have anything to do with that HTTP error. So this is a directive. Now, a directive in GraphQL, usually if you see an @ symbol in an SDL file, usually you should think, oh, that's a directive, right? Like there's some that come out of the box, like there's skip. So you can have some logic in there, like if a field in my type is null, for example, then we'll skip this call. But this is one that StepZen gives us called @rest, and it allows us to get data back from an endpoint from a query. So this is our endpoint. It's IP geolocation.abstract IP. I'm just gonna
I was gonna
look
ask,
through
is
here.
the URL correct? And the other thing, I guess in the STL, the $ are kind of like template strings in JavaScript.
Right. Yeah. Sorry for not covering that, but yeah, they're definitely
that's cool.
like, yeah. They indicate to StepZen that you're going to be replacing the values in there with the referred values. And then this configuration refers to a name inside our config.yaml, which I can't show you because I just switched it back to unhidden because I wanted to make sure that that wasn't part of the problem. But it refers to something that holds this API key here.
Okay. We can double check some stuff. Like what I typically like to do when debugging stuff is like I like to ask the obvious stuff, because a lot of times when you get in the weeds of something, you forget about the obvious stuff. So,
right.
Can we try just going to that URL, like the HTTPS all the way to the V1? Like we don't need to pass in.
Yeah, I just tried. It didn't like it when I tried, but I'm making sure I also didn't misspell anything. So give me a second.
Because I would expect an error if there's no API key, but I just want to make sure like the site loads even if it's giving an error.
Right. See if the problem is.
There it goes.
So
it works for you.
So it is my API key.
Yeah. Okay.
And it says so somehow it's not getting read in.
Well, here it does. You're not passing in the API key, which is why it's giving that error. But I just wanted to validate that URL actually works. So that's good.
Right.
So yeah, I guess the next thing, if you want to check your API key.
Yes, and I will. Yeah, I'll stop sharing for that, and I will double check it with the source from it. So.
Yeah, and you can actually paste it in here, like in the browser. If you do $, I think it was API_key, and then just pop in your key just to see. And then
Cool.
I will shrink Christina because you became like the big screen there.
Giant.
Yeah. But yeah. So yeah, that's just like we're saying in terms of debugging, I like to check those kind of things first, because if Lucia is able to get that endpoint loading in the browser with the API key where it doesn't give an error, then I think everything might be okay in terms of that endpoint, at least, assuming that the IP, and you can even test that IP address in, like, basically everything that's in that string, like the template variables, just plug in real values in the browser. If that loads up, then that's probably okay. Brian in the chat saying, I didn't see the code, but for that, the API key has to be passed as a URL variable. Yeah, but that's what you're doing, I think, because you have it as a query string parameter, so that's good. All right.
See.
So yeah, so if you have it with the API key and the IP hard-coded in the browser, if that gives an error, then maybe there's an issue with the endpoint, which is not good, obviously, because that's out of our control.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are some things that we could definitely still talk about.
Yeah.
Interesting. So the browser, besides the API key, which I think I have to pass in the URL, it is accepting the API key, but then it's saying we've got an invalid IP address. So
Interesting. I wonder if it's I can't remember in URLs if you, because when you have query string parameters, they have to be encoded if it's some characters. I don't know if periods need to be encoded or not. You could
let's pull up urlencoder.com and see if that.
Okay, let's check that. Yeah, because I think, yeah, if we do that. Oh,
so
the inception here. I see you in the.
Oh,
yeah, I see your Discord. we're getting major inception going on here.
Let me just no. How's that? Still?
See black something. I'm not sure.
Yeah, we're not seeing anything. No screen.
All right, let's try again. All right. Oh, you know what I did? Change windows.
There we go.
That should fix it.
Woohoo! Yep, that works.
All right.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I honestly can't remember if you have to encode periods. I know you have to do it for spaces.
There is a space in there. Maybe that was the problem. But
okay, that definitely could have been the problem. That's probably the problem. And in fact, that could be why. Oh, that's why the query's not working. There's a period. That's why. There we.
Potentially why. It's definitely would make the query not work, I would guess. So this.
Is there more spaces, or is that it?
I think that's it. I'm gonna refresh here and see if I can just make sure that there is no space there.
Okay. Okay. It's okay. This is different now. You're getting an unauthorized error, so that means your API key is not good. So the first issue was there was a space in the IP address, and the other one now is, I'm guessing it's your API key. So let's take a peek at that. Well, we won't take a peek at it because you don't want to show us your API key. But if you want to stop sharing your screen for a sec to get the test the API key.
Yes. Yeah, I'm gonna double check it with. Just gonna do a good old.
I always like debugging. It's like detective work. We got to crack the case. It's like we should have like it'd probably be violating copyrights, but we need that Law and Order. Dun, dun.
Here we are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Guess iced tea's on the stream tonight. All right, let's go crack it. But that first error we had with the space in the IP, that was because we copied it from Google, and that was 100% not obvious because we went with the assumption that that's good. So anyways, I always like these kinds of things because it's kind of interesting. We had a really interesting bug for dev for the moderation tools. It wasn't showing up for some people. And I finally figured it out. It's because we were looking for the word mod in the address, and somebody had a blog post that had the word mod in it. So that's why it wasn't.
That is really interesting, actually. That is fascinating.
It took a while to figure it out.
I'd like to learn more about why that was the case. But my key was copied and pasted wrong, so we are back live.
We're in business.
Yeah, so you can see.
All right.
Let's see. So we got way ahead of ourselves and dove into queries to debug, right? But I kind of like this window because you can see kind of the almost a hierarchical nature of GraphQL. So you got a query here,
Okay.
right? And then you're getting location by the IP address, and then you have all in the same brackets. You've got continent and the code and the geoname ID. And that
Okay.
comes back to you in the same layer of JSON. So noticing that is going to help you when it comes to writing SDL, which is something we can get into next.
Okay, and I'm just kind of curious about this because again, like we said at the start, we're both fairly new to GraphQL. Um, Get location by address is, well, it looks like a function because it's building a query, I guess, and then this is saying return those three fields, and that's what we get on the right? Is that
Yeah,
kind of
no.
the flow
So
of
you're
it?
saying it looks like a function because we've got this parameter here.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, it looks like that, right? But it's not. It's this whole thing is part of the query document,
Okay.
which I put this, which GraphQL kind of the runtime kind of reads and will process. So it can this entire thing can actually be passed as a string when you're consuming it. So this might actually be a time to look at export. So here, say you're using Apollo client and say it's in a React app, right? We've got some interesting boilerplatey looking code down here. So you can hit import in the StepZen graphical, and then you would have this code ready for you to copy and paste. You would use Apollo client, and then Apollo client takes in this string and translates it into GraphQL and makes the query for you there when you call use get query in there here. You can also do that with Gatsby.
Yeah.
Yeah, same kind of
So
idea.
yeah, but as you can see, it's all in like this, almost like a template literal style.
Yeah.
So that even the part that looks like a function.
Yeah, and for folks who might not have are not used to, if you do you mind going back to that view again for a sec, the export view?
Absolutely, but not
Um,
import.
what was it? Oh, yeah. It says GQL and then you have a template string. There's template strings, but you can use, this is something that styled components does too. It's like a function that's calling the template string. It looks a little weird, but it's able to get the pieces of the string that way. And like, so if you have template variables, in this case we don't because it's hard coded, but you can kind of get all that stuff and do interesting things with it instead of just having a template string. So.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a really good point. Thanks for keeping me real with explaining things at the simplest level. So let's go back to the SDL and now calmly look slowly through the. All right, so I think I want to start us off in just the main file here. We'll talk about the other files in a little bit. Some of them are StepZen specific, but this is where you start defining the queries that you can make, right? So this is a type, and for every query that you want to make, you're going to have to ask that query to fulfill a type. So, and you define it up here. So we've got the names of the fields, and then one of the things about GraphQL design principle is that we're very strict about the types. Here, everything is a string, right? Now, GraphQL out of the box comes with 5 types, I believe. It's string, boolean, float, int, and what is the last one? Oh, ID, right? But StepZen has one in here that you can see helps us with formatting, and it's date. You can define your own custom scalars at the top of the file, but with StepZen, you don't have to. You can also use an npm dependency, right? But if you're using StepZen, you don't have to introduce that dependency to your project.
Okay. Yeah.
So here, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say it looks. I mean, I've done a ton of TypeScript in this. It's not the exact syntax as TypeScript, but it looks pretty similar. I'm curious if they
Right,
took
with like
inspiration from.
I wonder about that too. I wonder what the GraphQL gods how they decided how they're going to type things. But yeah, it does look similar, right, with that colon and then the capital
Yeah.
letter. And I think, does TypeScript have an exclamation point sometimes to say it's required, or?
No, it's if you put
Preference.
a question mark, it's optional. Otherwise, like, but normally you would just put
Oh,
like
interesting.
string, and
I kind of like that. All right.
but
Yeah.
yeah, no,
And I did want to kind of get this type next to the sunrise sunset JSON that comes back from the API, because it is um, one of the hardest parts about starting from scratch is inferring how do I put this, like the structure of it, but you can just look at
okay,
the JSON that comes back from the API. So this is the sunrisesunset.org API docs. And you can see here that in results, we have sunrise, and then we've got a string. Okay, and you can start seeing the parallels. Sunset here, whoops. We have a string. Everything is formatted like a string, so that's why over here everything is a string, and it's all in the same
okay,
level like that. That can be helpful.
cool,
Um,
cool.
we've got a geolocation type that does the same thing. Any questions about types before we move on to queries, actually?
Not so much question. It was just kind of what you said. So like, there's the out of the box types, and you're saying StepZen. In this case, there's a date type which is custom, but anybody who works with GraphQL can create their own custom data types, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It would look like, I think, the syntax. I usually just use StepZens, so, but I think the syntax is kind of like Scalar, and then you would put like something like that.
Okay.
I would have to double check. And then at the top of your file, and then to make sure that and that would encode it just as JSON. So to make sure that it follows certain rules, you'd have to do a little more. But yeah, and now everything that is a query is inside this big, you'll notice like my bracket doesn't have a box around it.
Okay.
There's no matching ones. It's all at the bottom of this.
Okay. Because it's a big query.
Yes, we're going to skip the
Okay.
first one and focus, go into at rest, all the queries that use at rest for a second, and then we'll get up to the top one because that one's just a little bit more complex.
Okay.
So we kind of covered this, right? This is the get location by IP address query, and we're using that geolocation type that we scrolled by just now.
Okay.
And then we're also typing the parameter that it uses, because all the parameters need to be typed as well. And then at rest is the StepZen custom directive that takes two arguments. It takes an endpoint,
Okay.
and then it takes configuration, which kind of, it tells you, StepZen will infer this API key value, right? And it will, and that this is the name of my YAML portion that does that for me.
Okay.
Does that make sense, or should
Yeah,
I
and that's
describe
where
it another way?
No, that's good. And you were saying that you were not showing the config because that's got the API keys and stuff in it, and
Right, right. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I could show it in a little bit if I go off screen and create us a sample one to look at, to see what the structure is like, but we'll see if we have time for
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
Then this one gets a time zone by latitude and longitude, and this one takes it it calls a time zone API,
Okay.
passes in a key, and this one refers to a time zone config, which has the API key in it. And then
Okay.
we're getting sunrise by latitude and longitude. We're just going to return a bunch of information on a sunrise. You notice that these parameters are floats, which are different from the string, so they have to be numbers
Okay.
in our graphical. And this you'll notice we don't have a configuration argument because this one doesn't require an API key. But
Okay.
we had a top layer of data called results in the JSON, and we just peeled that off using this argument result root, if that
Okay.
makes sense. So you had a bracket that you now no longer have to kind of deal with in your business logic later. Now we'll
Okay.
go back up before we get to collect sunrise. We'll go back up to sequence.
Cool.
And
And is
I
it okay if I
really,
just stop you for
yeah,
1 sec? It's
yeah.
already what you were saying at the beginning here about like aggregating information. like I only realized it when you were going through the query, but like they're all different REST APIs. So this is already a great example of aggregating data and just getting like one
Right.
result.
Right. And like you said, they don't have to be REST APIs either. Could have been a REST API and a database or a GraphQL API. So, and this right here, actually, this line is, again, it's doing that. It's taking all the REST APIs and creating one query, getting information from
Okay.
all of them, returning information from all of them. So we're passing in an IP address. And this is important because the first query that we define here takes in this as a parameter. So this
Okay.
is the sequence directive, and it's got steps, which is, it looks like an array, but don't be fooled. There's no commas here. It's just the syntax in GraphQL.
Okay.
Yeah. So, where was I? Oh yeah. So each query the first query takes in that IP address parameter, right? And then it will return some data. The get time zone by lat longitude will take the latitude and longitude from the data returned from this query and then return its data.
Okay.
Get sunrise by latitude and longitude also takes the latitude and longitude from the results here because it'll kind of go back up. I don't want to say it's a tree because I don't know if the data is officially organized as a tree, but it'll go back up the ladder and retrieve the latitude and longitude from the results from the first query. And then the last one collects them all together so that you can see all of the fields returned when you call get sunrise by IP. So let's look at collect and see. This is an interesting one because it's got a ton of parameters. And that's because we're asking all of the other, it's going through all of the other queries and picking them up. And some of these queries have names with fields with the same name, right? This is going to show up a couple times. It will pick it up from the most recent query in the order. Okay. So say, forget the scrolling. Say this returns Civil Twilight Begin, and so does this one. Collect Sunrise will grab it from the third query, not the second one.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
And that's because it's the last one that executed, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
But say like sunset is only in the first query, then it'll just pick it up from that one.
Okay.
And then in order to kind of spit this all out, we've got a connector directive with a type of echo, and that basically tells StepZen we want to show all of this in a collect. So
okay.
So let's yes.
Yeah, I had a question, and I honestly don't know if you know the answer because I'm still brand new to GraphQL. But in the steps there at the top, where you have sequence and then the steps, in the case like we're passing in an IP address right now, so then we call the get location by address REST API. We get our IP, which returns the longitude and latitude, which we need for those other two. If there were queries where like they didn't need to have some information from like the previous one, do they all kind of run in parallel? Like, kind of like if you do a promise.
Right. So is it parallel or async? Or I've been learning Golang recently, and I'm just like, so there's also a difference in like concurrency. That's a really great question for our backend engineers, and I will definitely get back to you with that one.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm just curious, and no sweat if we can get back to that later for sure.
No, that's like an amazing question. I'm super excited to find out the answer to that one. But yeah, so let's try to get sunrise by the AP.
Okay.
Up our Explorer, pick up this IP address. And there we have it. It's going to say, you might notice that it says 3 a.m. and 11 a.m., which are kind of funny times for a sunrise. But that's because it's in UTC, so so it'll be it'll come through a little funny, but those are correct for where this IP address is.
Okay, cool.
One thing that I wanted to show that I did not get to was how to use fragments in the Graphical Explorer. So say, let's find some with similar, okay, that'll work, yeah. Say we had 2 queries. Now this actually, we're gonna need latitude and longitude first, so real quick, just grab those values. So this is just kind of for the sake of showing how to use fragments. I think normally you just want to get sunrise by IP since it returns everything, but say you were using both get sunrise by IP and get sunrise by lat long.
Okay.
And in both of them, you have the same fields that you're requesting. What you could do is you could create, by clicking that, you could create a fragment. And in GraphQL, fragments are kind of like shorthands for the same subsets of objects. Here, let's see.
Okay.
And you would get the same thing. So that wasn't like, we only saved ourselves like 6 lines of code by doing that. But you can imagine in a larger application that is very helpful to use fragments. And the syntax is like, you write fragment, and then you write the title of your fragment and the fields you want it to return. And then you write your ellipses and then the title of the fragment inside your query there.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that being great for reuse. And also just naming the fragment probably gives more context to what that stuff is probably too. So
yeah, right. So like I could do something like, I don't know. I'm not a weather person, so I'm going to call it begin and end fragment. And then you could like just, do something like that instead of just sunrise and sunset fragment, because this editor auto names it after the query that you fragment off of.
okay. And
yeah.
I'm not sure if I missed it. Is this a StepZen specific thing, or is this a GraphQL specific thing, fragments?
So this is something that comes in the graphical. Fragments themselves. Yeah, those are a GraphQL thing. And it would be great practice to like use them wherever things start getting kind of tricky. So
okay.
Go back to my editor. All right. So where were we with this? Oh yeah, now we can. I was gonna show a way to debug certain queries. And so before we were debugging, we knew which query had a problem, right? But you can imagine when we have the result of this query coming through, sometimes it gets a little like, okay, so naturally what we're going to do is we're going to walk through each query and see which one returns an error. So let's just mess with this URL right here and save it.
Okay. We're playing
and
with
this
fire
is
right
the
now.
yeah, right. Gonna refresh. What was our IP address? I know that had that tricky space in it, so let's make sure that's not in there. Actually, what we want is to get the sunrise by the IP, because that was the last one in the sequence, right? So
okay.
Okay, now we're getting null, right? And then go over to our editor. It's like, why is that null? Open up StepZen. It looks successfully deployed. So let's walk through slowly. Let's walk through our queries. So get sunrise by IP is not working. So what's the one right below that? It's collect sunrise, which actually that one is functioning and helping us with our just collecting all of the results of these. So we can kind of skip that and go to, let me check the order that these were in real quick. Let's go to get sunrise by lat long.
Okay.
I wonder if those are valid longitudes. Okay, that's funny. That's working. So it's getting, this one must be getting the latitude and longitude correctly from get location. Then let's try kind of just like peeling back and going slow step by step. Get time zone by a lot long. Interesting. We're getting null there. And then last one is get location by IP address. So let's try that. Oh, connector data fetch failed with retries exceeded. So there's a number of reasons that can happen, right? But here I suspect it's because we double check here and like, oh, we don't have the whole URL. And then you put it back in, see if that works. I'm gonna have to refresh. Make sure I saved. And it was.
Don't forget the space.
Right, every time it's like I want to. Sometimes, do you ever get like? Then there we go. It's working now. You ever get like debug deja vu when like you go back the next day and then you do the same thing and you're like, oh, if only I could see like my Google history and like, or you know, like I see like the ghost of like a debugging Lucia with like coffee and like crazy hair every time I go back to Google and I see like a purple link and I'm like, oh, I've been here before, like, you know, yeah.
Okay, so
yeah,
so basically, yeah, it gave a pretty good error for us to go look at. Like it said it did some retries, so then we're like, okay, why is it retrying? So let's go check the URL, for example, or the query for that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So just to recap what we've done, we went through what is GraphQL, like super speedy, but went through what is GraphQL. We saw that it was both a query language and a runtime. We played around in this Graphical. We made some queries. We did a little debugging. Then we revisited how to write a schema and how to write SDL. We also looked at some custom scalars and some custom directives that StepZen brings you. And then we worked through and those directives were sequence and rest. So I don't know, it's been pretty fun so far. I did want to maybe turn the conversation towards architecturally, like why GraphQL is helpful. So we can see what we were talking about at the beginning is that you ask for what you want and you get it. And that's called like a declarative approach, right? So you can, you're not just stuck with whatever the endpoint returns. You're not mirroring a database exactly. You can pull the data in as you want it for the front end developers. And there's I think advantages both for back end developers and front end developers because the back end developers know their point where they have to hand off the information. It's the GraphQL schema, right? And then the front end developers are able to ask for what they want and then just put it right in there without, adding all of this extra business logic and filtering and stuff that you have to do in JavaScript often to get the data in the right format so that when the user clicks the button, the right things show up, right? Yeah, and I really like how, I'm going to stop sharing now. I really like how Eve Porcello puts it, which is, she says the GraphQL schema is an agreement between the front end and the back end devs. And she says more about it, I think, on page 177 of her book.
Okay.
But really what she's saying is it creates something that it helps with communication because when back-end devs and front-end devs start on a project, they may end up having different ideas of how information is going to be created and collected and deleted, right? And then further down in the project, they come across those differences that they had, which maybe they didn't talk about before. But if they've made a GraphQL layer, then they have this kind of contract between them where they're like, this is where the information lives, and this is how we pass it on to each other. So.
Yeah, and I guess it also, if you're collaborating with folks, it potentially makes it easier to work with data. Uh, I'm guessing. I don't know.
Yes.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like such
For
In
sure.
your
a
experience, has it been
yeah, yeah.
easier to collaborate with people?
Yeah, for
Uh,
sure. Because we both know, like, when we're referring to customer ID, we know which one in the schema that we're referring to, and how to get it.
Yeah,
yeah,
someone who I had to teach students the whole API section when I was at a boot camp and working with that and working with JSON and digging in and having to get the information you want and stuff like that. I could see how GraphQL would just be like, oh, for a lot of people who are like trying to mess
Right.
with like APIs, just like,
Right.
oh, this is so much
Yeah.
better.
Yeah. At the same time, I'm glad I learned about REST because
Mhm.
GraphQL can really help you. There's still like 20 years of REST development out there, right? And GraphQL can
right.
really help you leverage it, the information you have from REST. So knowing the REST paradigm is helpful when you're
Yeah,
implementing GraphQL.
yeah. It's
Yeah,
almost
and I
like, when you have to learn math and you have to learn the hard way first, and then the teacher's always like, and this is the easier way. So learn the hard way first.
Yeah, yeah, right, yeah. No, that's definitely what it's like. I mean, we're seeing a lot of folks looking for that too. Like, how do we convert our REST to GraphQL? And it's like really, it's like layering it over and creating that kind of delineation in your architecture. Um,
yeah,
yeah, I know. It's funny. Eve Porcello talks about moving over to GraphQL inside your architecture, and she has some suggestions for doing that. And I thought one was really interesting. It was don't maintain your REST API. That is, if you not don't debug it, but like don't if you have an endpoint to add, see if you can just put it into the GraphQL endpoint instead, and then
okay.
eventually you'll have slowly converted your entire system over into your
Yes.
GraphQL API.
And
Yeah.
I guess to again in my very limited experience, the fact that there's types in there, like, does that make the queries strongly typed? So like if I make a query like where we're passing in the IP address, which is a string, but if I happen to pass in, I don't know, a date or something, will the query blow up, or is it further down? Like does it get again, I'm not,
Yeah,
I
it'll blow up. We can look at that if you want.
yeah,
um,
let's make things blow up,
it's
sure.
just yeah. So I'm just gonna, sorry everybody for
Yeah,
the lots of, hold on, I'm gonna stop sharing just so I can, yes,
no
make
need to
this
say sorry.
infinite, infinite stream experience go away. Okay.
Okay,
Um, and now we'll go
cool.
back to the graphical here. So yeah, let's put away the Explorer and try passing this as like a number, right?
Yeah,
Already you can see it's angry, the graphical is, but
and okay, yeah. So
yeah,
okay, it does. So you get the validation error there. That's great.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Brian was just saying in the chat. He says, "I don't miss having to dig through API docs to figure out what I get, or dealing with the learning curve of every different REST API." Um, so yeah,
Wow.
there's a usability
Yeah.
factor too, like the developer experience as well. So can definitely see that. And I know, again, limited limited GraphQL experience, but some headline skimming I've done. I know it plays really well with TypeScript. So then you get all this IntelliSense, and
Mhm.
like I'm pretty sure you can generate types, like you can generate your TypeScript types from the GraphQL types. I think like there's tools that do this.
Ooh,
I
that sounds
forget.
like a fun toy.
I feel like Brian probably knows the name of them. They're like code generation tools, so it can read the types and then it generates these TypeScript types. So then all of a sudden, when you're working in your front end application or even back end, like if it's a Node application in TypeScript or Dino, you get all this IntelliSense if you're in something like VS Code or whatever. So it's yeah, I think it's a good move that they went with the strong typing there.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, so that's that's GraphQL and StepZen we've spent an hour, but kind of like at a glance, right? We've
Yeah,
got
yeah.
some links that I sent you guys, I think, that we can share.
Yeah,
if
I've
people
dropped
want
some of them. I'll drop
in
the rest of them now.
Yeah, for sure. And while Christina's just finding those, the local test website you were running, is that available on like the StepZen org on GitHub or something, or is that something just in-house you were using for the demo? If folks want
The
to
local
kind of,
thing. So that's that's I believe that's on. I can grab the link for
Is that the
you.
open source API that you linked?
No, that one's
No.
different. That's
Okay.
StepZen
All right.
specific. This Graphical.
Okay.
I'm just gonna Google Graphical GitHub and grab it up for you.
Yeah, take care. Thanks for popping by, Brian. Brian had to go get up to something, I guess. It's always it's oh, hey, how's it going, Oscar? It's always funny when there's like a ton of people, and initially I didn't know what their handles, like who it was on Twitch, and then over time, like there's like most people I know who they are now, but it's like because before it always used to be like hello so and so handle. Anyways, yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, Oscar, you just popped in, I think, but yeah, we've been going over GraphQL, and Lucia's been giving us a nice overview of how it kind of all plays together. We've been working with a demo app, like a geolocation app, to allow us to practice some queries and stuff, and just kind of see how all the parts of GraphQL work. Yeah, Christina just dropped the graphical, not the GraphQL as I call it. Now I feel silly. But yeah, okay, so we can grab that. But what I was gonna say was like the demo app, not graphical, but the geolocation API. That's just something you built just for demo purposes, or can folks pull that down from GitHub, or?
No,
That is
they
the
can.
open source API, right? That's the one that you
Oh, okay,
gave
okay.
me.
Right.
Cool.
So the GraphQL API that we were playing with, that is open source and that is up on GitHub, and that's in the links, I believe, that I sent you. But the APIs that it marshals together, I know they're all public. I'm not sure where their GitHub repos are. I could grab those for you if you wanted, but.
Oh no, that's cool. As long as it links to the main thing, I'm sure we can figure out what the rest comes from.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so no, that's really great, giving us the overview there. I don't know if there's any parting thoughts aside from we all need to eat hamburgers now, because we were talking about hamburgers at the start of the stream.
Hamburgers.
I ate lunch
Use
and I'm hungry again
GraphQL.
now.
Yeah.
I ate like this massive bowl of rice and leftovers, and anyways, cool. Yeah, so I think Christina's gonna drop your links where folks can find you on like Twitter and stuff. Yeah, no, this has been great. And also, yeah, folks, if you get a chance, it's Christina already dropped it. There's some links to StepZen, which talks about some of these things like the custom scalar types, but you can check them out too. And yeah, I just want to say thanks so much for coming on, and definitely would love to have you back on again another time.
Yeah, let's do
We're probably
it.
gonna be
Let's
a
do
little
more
busy in
GraphQL.
October because of
Over.
Hacktoberfest probably. We'll
Yeah,
be
right. Yeah.
streaming all day long, I think. But yeah, for sure, we'd love to have you back on. Cool.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely will.
Yeah. Next week we're gonna have Arslan on, who I know from MLH, which is Major League Hacking, and they're going to be talking about creating a backend application with Fastly. So if you're interested in Fastly at all, come check that out. I know nothing about it, so I'm interested in learning about it. And yeah, again, thank you so much for teaching us more about GraphQL. I always get really excited whenever I learn more about it, and then I'm always like, I should go learn more about it. Afterwards.
Exactly. Yeah, we need
I
accountability
need an opportunity to play with this.
Yeah.
Cool.
So thank you so much.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for popping by. Sorry, did you want to go ahead and?
No, I was just saying thanks for having me.
Cool. Yeah, perfect. All right, well, take care, everybody, and we will see you next week.